We've now got the ability for someone to create a new video entity by filling out a form and a whole administrative UI to go with it. We've also got the ability to navigate to a URL for our entity, but right now all we see when we go there is the title of the entity. What I'd like to do in this lesson is take a look at the steps that are required in order to render the rest of the properties on our entity. We're going to override the entity controller and look at some of the build content methods and how they work so that we can add our properties into the fully rendered entity object. Let's go ahead and take a look at adding these properties and building this out so that we can view the actual content. When we look at our site right now and we go and navigate to one of the video entity pages, it's pretty boring. All we see is the title video and the string hello cowboy. Right now that's being handled in our module in this video entity underscore view underscore entity function, which is set up as just a simple page callback for anybody that navigates to video/ID. I'd like that to be a little bit more useful and actually show the information we want to see on the page. We could do something really easy to start out, like just set the title of the page to the name of the video. So we could use the Drupal set title function and set it to video name, like so. Now when I refresh the page, you can see that it's actually displaying the title of our video, Learning IRC, instead of just the term video. Also updated in our address bar as well. But what if I want to control what that video entity looks like? This function here, where we're calling entity underscore view, is delegating off to the entity controller and saying, take this video entity and run through all of the different steps that are necessary in order to give me a render array that I can just return, and the theme system will deal with outputting on the screen. So that's what we get here, is a render array in this video entity. However, it doesn't currently contain any of our content. We need to update our controller so that when the build content method is called, our things like the embed code and the duration of a video are added as part of the render array and returned and then displayed on the screen. So we're going to do that by overriding our controller. You remember the controller class is the one that controls all of the different CRUD operations. So create, read, update, delete, and view as well. We've already got a video entity controller class defined, and we're using it in our hook entity info. So we just need to add some new methods to this that override the existing controller's methods. The existing controller can be found in the entity.controller.inc file in the entity module from contrib. And we're extending the default controller from this file. If we look at it, we'll see that there's a build content method on the default API controller here. What I want to do is override this method and add our content to the returned array from this method. So the first thing to do is just actually copy and paste the definition of the function into our own controller, like so. So now whenever build content is called on a video entity, our method's going to be called instead of the default one. However, we probably still want the default one to get called. So I would probably do something like this, where you call the method on the parent controller and pass in all of the same variables that were passed into this one. This will allow the entity API to still do its thing with building content. And we'll see later on this is important for doing things like adding fields to our entity. And now we can make whatever changes we want to this build array and then just return it. The build array is a simple render array in Drupal, so we can just start adding content to it. Simplest thing we could do is add our duration field. Now let's try that. What we've got to start with is the number of seconds in length that our video is. Drupal has a handy format interval function that we can use in order to provide better formatting for that number of seconds. So let's just do this. And we actually need to call it entity there. So that's what's passed into our method. So that's the video entity itself, which has a duration property, which we can pass to the format interval function, which will return our number of seconds in a nice string format. Let's see if this works. We switch back over to our site and refresh. Nope. We need to make one other change. In our .module file, we also need to make sure that here in the video entity view entity callback, we now return the actual render array instead of the string of text that we had temporarily placed there before. So we save that. Now, when I refresh, you can see that it's printing out duration of this video. Awesome. What about dealing with our embed code? Let's output that as well. So we could do something similar. All we need to do is keep tacking this information on to the renderable array here. An embed code from YouTube is really just a string. It's an iframe in most cases. We know what the actual ID or embed code of the video is because that was entered when somebody created our video entity. We just need to output that in a way that makes sense and can be displayed to users. So the normal string for embedding a video, just copy and pasted from YouTube, looks something like this. It's an iframe with a width and a height, and then its source is set to youtube.com/embed, and then the embed code of the video we'd like to display. I'm going to put that in here, but instead of hard coding this embed code, I'm going to use the embed code that's stored with our entity object and return that. Now we should be able to display the video on the page as well. And we refresh. You can see that I'm seeing both the duration and the video itself. It's not the prettiest, but we're starting to get the content on the page, and we can deal with making it all look nice at a later point. That's a simple example of overriding the controller to enhance the building of content, so whatever's going to be displayed. The controller does a lot of other things too, though. It's part of what makes it possible to save our entity, for example. When we could do video, call the method save, and it saves it to the database. Let's take a look at overriding the save method and making a couple changes there as well. You remember when we created the administrative UI form? We created fields for the name, the embed code, and the duration properties, but we left created at and updated at out of that form. We said that these are things that should be automatically updated for us. I'm going to do that by overriding the save method in our controller. Once again, I'm going to look at the original controller, which looks like so, and I'm going to just copy and paste this function definition from there into our video entity controller. So now we're going to override the save method as well. So we've got our copy of the function with some documentation about why we're overriding it. Of course, I'm going to want to make sure that whatever I do here, I still call the parent class's save method so that all the things that the entity API controller provided us still get called. The easiest way to do that here is to just say, call that method. Parent save, we'll pass in the entity and all of the arguments that came into our method, like so. And now, all I need to do is update the video or the entities created at property and the updated at property. And those are just timestamps, so I can set them like so. Updated at, it makes sense to set this every single time somebody calls save on our entity, because every time we save it, that's an update. Created, however, only makes sense to set that timestamp the very first time that someone saves a video entity. This is really easy because in the controller here, our entity object is going to have an isNew property set to true, but only when it's being first created, only if this is a brand new entity. So we could just simply check for something like if is set is new, then go ahead and set the created at time to the current timestamp. Every time somebody saves it, we'll set the updated at time, and then we'll just call the parent method or parent class's save method to do everything that it was already doing. So now, after making these changes and overriding the CRUD operations in the controller, I'm able to affect the entity that's going to be saved right before it's saved. You could also do this with any of the other methods that the controller takes care of, like reading, deleting, and so forth. So that's overriding our basic controller and enhancing it with the things that are unique for our custom entity type.